Hello and welcome to the Neurodivergence and Mental Health podcast. My name is Sally Nilsson and I'm a psychotherapist, published author, public speaker and mum. I discovered my autism and ADHD aged 56 in March 2021, and having rewritten my life story, I'm on a quest to advocate for neurodivergent community. I hope you enjoy listening to my incredible guests sharing their experiences of autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, Tourette's and OCD. We talk about growing up, education, work and personal stories, and how mental health has played its part in shaping lives. Our conversations cover spectrums, traits, challenges, acceptance and successes. So sit back, relax and find out what it means to feel, think and be different in a neurotypical world. I'm delighted to introduce Miguel Toribio-Mateas. Miguel is an applied research and development professional who studies and works with the complex relationship between food, nutrients and behaviour on the gut and the brain. Miguel was involved in a pioneering biotech startup analysis with Professor Tim Spector, renowned microbiome scientist at King's College London. He also received the prestigious Santander Work-Based Learning Award in 2016, which helped fund his doctorate on the gut microbiome and mental health at Middlesex University. Hi Miguel, thank you very much for agreeing to take part in the podcast. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Sally. It's a pleasure being with you.
Great. Oh, it really is. It really is. I mean, the reason I asked you on is because I really like the article you wrote on LinkedIn about the value of caring for others. So if it's okay, I'd like to wrap the questions around that, please. But we may go in different directions, but I'm not going to surprise you with anything. This is just a lovely, friendly chat. Does that sound okay with you?
That's good. Yes, thank you.
Okay, so I understand you are a new member of the Primary Care and Community Neurology Society Steering Committee. What does that role entail?
Well, the Primary Care and Community Neurology Society, or the PCNS, is a society that has a mission to empower patients, practitioners, and industry partners by promoting engagement in an active community where all voices matter. And so it's basically looking at the person as an individual and taking patients' narratives and stories into account. So when we talk about person-centered care in neurology, you actually really you just don't pay lip service to that. You really bring that person into the center of the story, and you listen to what is important to them. So that's really it in a nutshell.
And that's so interesting because you're using a phrase that I've been using a lot actually recently, and that's lip service. And I do get fed up sometimes with so much lip service and not enough and awareness and not enough actual action. And, you're talking about community, you're talking about primary care, secondary care, everybody talking to each other. And it is difficult. Recently we've had the situation where you can't go and see a doctor anymore. You don't know who your doctor's going to be. You have a short session with them. And as far as neuro things are concerned, especially with neurodivergency, I mean, well, that's a session for another day. It's very, very difficult. It's, you don't seem to have enough of a problem. You're not at the top. So we're going to send you a letter from the NHS saying you don't meet the criteria. You might have to wait 3 years now, depending on where you live. And then what happens when you've had the diagnosis? It's that post-diagnosis. So what you're doing is incredibly important work, really, really important. And I'm going to be following you, to see the progress that you make.
Thank you. No, that's good. I mean, the key thing to this is that it's a newly formed committee. So there's an existing committee, and the society is renewing its mission and vision. And the idea has been driven by a colleague of mine called Neil Bindeman, who is a neuroscientist, and he is one of the key members in the steering committee. And he's driven the idea that everybody in that steering committee should be a healthcare professional or somewhat related to healthcare and neurology, either on the actual primary care side or, you know, as a consultant or as a neuroscientist like myself. So I'm not actually a neurologist, I'm a neuroscientist. So everybody on the committee has got a neurological condition they are living with. So in my case, it's ADHD, and it has been anxiety for a while before my diagnosis. Some other people in the committee live with MS, with epilepsy, with migraines, depression, fibromyalgia, you know, you name it. There's a range of conditions in there. And there's a member who's got son who's autistic as well. And he's kind of like representing that neurodivergency angle in there as well alongside me. So we feel that that's important actually in order to really pay attention to the stories of people. If we are some of those people, we bring that angle ourselves so we know what to listen for.
And that is absolutely vital. You know, I'm not going to have a conversation with you about Spectrum 10K because that's, again, a subject for another day, but only to say that the advisory board is only 4 out of 11 who are autistic, and the whole team, as far as we know, none of them are. And it's really important and refreshing to hear from you, Miguel, that in your committee, you know, each and every one of you have got something to bring to the table. So, you know, that's really, really good to hear. Thank you so much for telling me about that. So in 2015, when you were studying for a master's degree at Roehampton University, you had a situation where you handed in your essay late and received little support, which meant that you received a merit mark instead of a distinction. How do you think that situation could have been handled better? I mean, what happened? Tell me what happened.
Yeah, so this is the kind of the basis of my story on LinkedIn, and I held it there for years because, as you will know, with ADHD, one of the things that can happen is that a tiny thing that for a neurotypical person might just be something they get over very quickly. It might actually cause you a lot of pain, and especially if it's something that causes you a great deal of pleasure. And my studies are my source of dopamine. So I went back to university. I'm 48 now. So, you know, when you go back as a mature student, life is grown around you. It's not the same as when you're in your 20s and you've got all the energy in the world. And my brain got a little bit worse during my 30s and my 40s as well. So my ADHD was actually rife at that point. It had been probably from 2012 that I had been looking at having an assessment, and I got kind of like scared and pulled in different directions, and I didn't do it until last year. But I was struggling with focus, with concentration a lot. And I did really well on the assignment. I managed to submit it to the university portal literally 1 hour late.
Yes.
And my supervisor, or the lady who was in charge of the course at the time, basically I sent her an email to say, I've sent the assignment an hour late. I'm very sorry. Is there any way that this can be taken into account? I didn't have a diagnosis at that point, so I wasn't going through the channel of the university support, which is non-existent for ADHD. There's dyslexia support, but there's no ADHD policy, as I found out later.
Yeah.
So anyway, I got marked down to 50%. I was gutted. And I still remember the email, sadly you have missed the deadline, so you will be capped at 50%. So it sounds to some people petty because I still got a 71%. 75 was first in the master's, and I got a first in my dissertation. But the average, because I got 50% in one module that was quite chunky in the weight, in the end I got marked down to 71. So I didn't get a distinction. And what I was driving at is the fact that as a mature student who has difficulty focusing and concentrating on subjects for a long time, to achieve that is actually really important. It's quite a source of pride in your personal achievement. And it actually hurt me quite a lot. It was kind of at the back of my mind all the time. And only last year when I got my diagnosis, I think you'll know, you go through a lot of emotion throughout, after a diagnosis. You process things that have gone on in your life. And I was quite angry about that. Suddenly it was just right at the front of my mind, thinking, God, why did I get marked down on this? And it was making me feel really irritated. So I thought, I'll write an email and I'll explain what was going on at the time. I was actually close to somebody who had quite severe depression. So that was actually another factor that was affecting me. There was a lot going on. I had to travel 2 hours to the university and 2 hours back. And it was very old fashioned. There wasn't any online. There was all kind of like, you had to be there for the lectures and everything else. So there was a lot on my plate at that time. And I tried to explain. I didn't get a response for about 2 weeks. And then I thought, okay, I'm going to resend the email that I sent to this lady. I'm going to send it to the dyslexia support. There's only dyslexia support at Roehampton. There's no other support. I'm going to send it and I'm going to say, this is what has happened. Have you got a policy? Would you be so kind to explain whether you have a policy for ADHD support? This is what happened to me. I now have a diagnosis. I believe this was because of my ADHD. Is there any way of putting it right? Or at least if there's no way to put it right, can I let you know that this is what happened so you have an awareness? And if you have a policy on ADHD support, you are looking out for these kind of things because, I asked for 3 or 4 extensions to my essay. And I guess, academics get together every few weeks and they discuss the students. So mature students, 4 extensions to the essays or the exams or whatever. So I think it would have been nice for somebody to ask, are you okay? Do you need support of any kind? But it was never asked, it was never a question that, I think university at that point thought I was a mature student. I was too busy. I was working and I was just spreading things too thin. So I got an email from the learning support lady saying they didn't have support for ADHD, as in like a policy for ADHD, but I shouldn't worry because all students get all the support they need. And I actually felt like saying, this is at the point that I thought, okay, well, the professor actually thought I was attacking people personally. It wasn't my intention. The support from the university is telling me, oh, don't worry, students get all the support that they need. That wasn't my case. I thought, okay, well, I'll leave it there and then maybe I'll pick it up with an organization like the ADHD Foundation or something like that at a later point where I can actually lobby a little bit for these kind of things, because I would like to do that, because it's not fair on any student who struggles to actually have to go through things like that. So
it's terrible. And I think there's 2 things that I pick up on from what you've said. The support is really important, because if there was support in place, then they would have given you the extensions and that would have been okay. And that does need to change. I mean, there's so much that needs to change. And as we advocate for change, hopefully we will see change in the future. But the other thing, of course, is that you are ADHD, and one of the biggest traits right up the top there is rejection sensitivity dysphoria. And the thing is that, many people with ADHD, anybody can feel bad being criticized or rejected. But the thing is, if you're ADHD, it can be crippling, it can be disabling, it can affect us so much more and lead to mental illness. So, you worked hard, you did the best you can. I hope lessons have been learned and things will change in the future. Thank you for telling me that. Now, you wrote something which I really loved, this expression of this that you wrote. You wrote that your thoughts were like bits of paper in a wind tunnel. I know that you have a diagnosis of ADHD. Please, can you describe how your mind works?
It's It's random. So, as I'm sure many ADHD people will know, and I can do things in a non-sequential order. So I don't think I've ever read a book in my whole life from beginning to end, like starting in page 1 and finish on page 300 or something.
Yeah.
I get bored and I go to page 200 and then I jump back to whatever. And especially because I read a lot of non-fiction books, so like science books. So I never actually read a whole chapter from beginning to end. I kind of like jump around, and I think I do that a lot with tasks as well. So I'll have to do, you know, a whole project will have 20 tasks, and I may do task 10 to 15 first, and then I do, you know, whatever. So that is me through and through. It has been all my life, since I remember. It's worked, so I'm here.
Oh, wow, and it does. I mean, something that, just to add to that, this is just a little extra. I mean, from the minute I wake up to the minute I go to bed, I have a running commentary all day long, all the time. And I just wondered, are you similar to that? Is your brain busy all the time?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of kind of like looking at what I'm doing from the outside kind of thing, as if I'm kind of you know, I've got 2 cameras, like a fly on the wall documentary kind of thing.
And neurotypical people, you know, that doesn't happen to them. I mean, it does to some people, you know, if they've got OCD or they have intrusive thoughts and things like that. But the fact that many of us with ADHD, that we are literally chatting, we're having conversations. It's like lots of different radio stations going off at the same time. I don't mind it. It keeps me company. It's kind of okay, but you know, it needs distracting sometimes. Otherwise, it can overtake a bit. So, you know, you describe how the need to hyperfocus means you cut out everything else around you to get a project done. How does this affect those around you? And how does this affect things like awareness of time, your sleep, and your general self-care?
Yeah, awareness of time is a big thing for me, because I'm very time blind. So if I'm obsessed with something, whether it's work, you know, a particular piece of work that I'm doing, or things like music, for example, which is another big thing for me, you know, creating some music with some software or something, which I used to be obsessed with about probably 15 years ago or so. And basically I did nothing but that for days and days and days, like, you know, and ignored everything and everybody else. I think with my latest iteration of that probably has been my going back to college and doing all the science bits, because I had done some science before, but I hadn't actually become a scientist, so to speak, until probably like 10 years ago or something like that. And again, I thought I was actually missing out compared to being 20 and just doing my PhD when I'm 22 or something like that. So I felt I had to work extra hard. Yeah. And that meant I've cut out a lot of things in my life. I mean, my real friends that I can count on the fingers of one hand, they know, because they love me and they accept me for how I am. So they say, oh, you never go out anymore or whatever, you know, you're boring now and old, and we kind of like take the mickey out of each other. But closer to home, like with my other half, I think he's just used to the fact that, you know, when I go on one, and he just needs to leave me alone to get on with it, because it's just there's no stopping me. If I'm going for something, I'm just completely going for it. And that happened during that master's, for example. I was quite obsessed with just, you know, getting everything right and doing all everything I could. And I just finished my doctorate as well. And even though it's been easier in global terms, it's actually been easier than the master's, because there's been less stress in my life throughout the 5 years of the doctorate. It's still been a case of, you know, putting a lot of hours on into something that I feel really passionate about. So I just really focus on that. And then other things just fall by the side, basically, whether it's relationships or friends or, so it's balancing that kind of thing. It's tricky. I'm lucky that people around me are quite accepting and they love me from, you know, for what I am. But yeah, it can be challenging.
It can be, and you know, it can annoy people, and you can feel isolated and lonely. And I certainly did, because, for quite a long time now, my special interest has been in neurodivergency, and it's it's an impossible conversation to have with friends and family, because unless they are too, it's just too complicated, and you have to kind of steer away from it. But I'm trying to sort of climb out of the special interest and hyperfocus a bit. But it is an amazing skill. It's a great skill as well. A common trait of ADHD is the need to work for deadlines, as you said yourself, and I know how that feels. I find it impossible to get important things done unless I'm up against a tight deadline. And this was the case when I wrote my book. I could not have written it without being autistic and ADHD. I need the stress to motivate me, but of course this can lead to anxiety and burnout. Can you tell me about your experience of this happening to you?
Yeah, so I'm very much the same. I'm from an early age. I remember my mom and dad. My dad is nearly 90. My mom is late 80s, and they're still quite with it. And we laugh about these kind of things because they say, God, I cannot believe you're doing a doctorate now. You're knocking 50 and finishing your doctorate because, do you remember when your dad was telling you, Miguel, study, because I would just leave everything until the night before. So that was me through and through from an early age. And in terms of recent events, last year, the reason why I ended up going to have an assessment was because I actually ended up quite burnt out. And it was out of anxiety because I had to hand in my thesis. I had shed loads of work, stress that was crippling. And that stress with ADHD, again, people who are neurotypical might experience stress in a different way. When you're in a situation that you feel really pushed and kind of questioned, and it wasn't a nice situation to be in last year, and which made me leave basically. So I'm grateful in a way that everything has a silver lining. But I ended up really run down. I had loads of pain in my body. I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia. I had loads of anxiety at that point, crippling anxiety. I was having kind of panic attacks out of nowhere in the middle of the evening, just sat there watching the telly, and suddenly I feel I'm going to have a heart attack. So the fibromyalgia was a bit of a cue for me, because the ADHD was in the back of my mind. I had been for years, probably for 10 years now. And I just started reading about fibromyalgia, and I came up with some studies saying that a lot of people with fibromyalgia have ADHD. There's a huge overlap. So that's what made me click. I thought, I had a colleague at work who got diagnosed as well. So I've got a nice community, because there's about 5 friends now who have been diagnosed quite recently in the last year or so.
Have they all got ADHD as well, or have they got chronic stress that has led to fibromyalgia?
They have no. So this was ADHD. So I was having conversations with this particular colleague of mine about the ADHD, and he suffers from stress as well, from anxiety. He has done for a while, and we were sharing so much about the experiences and so on, and I thought, well, that's it. I'm making an appointment now, and I kind of I was open-minded to what it could be, but really, I wanted to get diagnosed. I wanted to get assessed for ADHD, and I did, and I'm very happy I did, because it's actually kind of cleared a lot of crap from my mind, in terms of knowing why I have done things in the past, and why I do things the way I do them. But anxiety and burnout are 2 big ones, because when you go full blast into something and you ignore sometimes eating, although I'm quite an eater anyway, so I never have that problem. I wish I had it a little bit, some days. I don't really have that, but I can go, until early hours of the morning if I'm really, really into something, or, my brain is kind of like a washing machine on a spin cycle, it doesn't stop. And when that happens, then other things just fall by the side. And if you do it long enough, then you end up being burnt out. So the diagnosis has helped me realize that I need my sleep. I need to eat properly.
It's non-negotiable, isn't it? Sleep.
Things like that are really, really important. And noise, for example, so it affects me a lot. I'm really, really sensitive to noise. So I need to find a quiet space. That sometimes it's challenging because I've got 2 dogs, so when they go on one barking as well, it's kind of a, you know.
I'm sorry, I'm much happier with a meowy cat than dogs. I couldn't cope with dogs. I mean, I've got to ask you, you know, how's your fibromyalgia now? And, you know, what happens with fibromyalgia? Does it run a course and then go away? You tell me about that.
Yeah, so the fibromyalgia is a little bit better. It comes in flare-ups. So basically, one day you haven't got any pain, and then the next day you have got pain, and it, you know, out of nowhere. It is quite triggered by stress. So I now know that I cannot really get in a situation like I did last year, where I thought I could carry the world on my shoulders, and I couldn't really. And that was a really humbling situation as well for me, because I think for many years I just thought of me as being resilient, just doing, you know, I could take everything. I could take any projects. I could do hours and hours. I could take like 3 jobs at the same time, because I smashed it. I just worked, you know, Saturdays and Sundays, and I didn't mind. And last year I just thought, you know what, you may have been able to get away with it like 15 years ago, but you cannot now.
And will you always have fibromyalgia, or can it go away?
Well, I think once you have it, you have it. I think it can disappear. It's rare that it does disappear, although some people have actually experienced that. But yeah.
Well, I wish I absolutely, you know, everything crossed for you, and that you keep your stress levels down, and you know, and you know how to do that anyway, and just, you know, you'll have your markers, you'll use your observing self, and you'll hopefully, with your self-awareness, you'll move through that. So what do you do, you know, what do you do to cope now? You know, what sort of hobbies and coping strategies have you got to de-stress and to keep calm?
So my dogs, even though they're a source of stress, they're a source of love as well. Like really, you know, Labradors are cuddly, they're silly. So they're really good for distressing. And I think this time of the day when they are tired, I've got one of them just lying at my feet here. They are tired, they just want to cuddle. And I love that. I love just spending time with them, and with my other half, just that, you know, just watching the telly or reading together or whatever we do in the evening. So I'm you know, I do enough highbrow things during the day that I don't need a highbrow evening. You know, I'm quite happy watching Coronation Street and having a, you know, and having a home meal, you know, a home cooked meal.
Well, that sounds heaven. I have to say that I'm binge watching Grey's Anatomy at the moment.
That's good.
I love it. I'm way into season 2, and I mean, it's perfect for me. Anything to do with hospitals, you know, I'll just chomp it up. I love it all. So I really, really like that. So going back to the sort of assessment, you know, why were you so scared of the prospect of an ADHD assessment, and what was the process like for you? You know, how did you feel after the diagnosis? You mentioned a few things.
Yeah, I wasn't scared. I mean, I did for years, and I'm still connected, although I don't do so much work with them anymore. I did work with a team of psychiatrists that provide support for a range of mental health conditions. They specialize in addiction care, particularly, and obviously there's a lot of overlap with other kind of areas of mental health in that particular instance. But yeah, so I knew psychiatrists were not scary. I think I was kind of scared to find out what could be there. You know, if you go to the psychiatrist and start telling them, you know, everything with your heart in your hand, what are they going to tell you, and how is that going to impact me, but also my relationships, my friends, you know, all this kind of stuff. It's kind of like knowledge is power, but also it can be scary. I'm glad I did. I as I said, I had overwhelming kind of amount of emotions to the point that, you know, I was just boring the pants of everybody, just telling them about ADHD and, you know, how neurodiverse people are different. And, you know, I just jumped onto I just want to let everybody know that, you know, it's okay. You can get your diagnosis and you can actually carry on living. It's not that scary.
We'll be a bit careful though. I've certainly found that, you know, I've got the same with, you know, my best friends, I count on one hand. But the thing is that now I'm diagnosed, I know that some of my friends, you know, some of my friends are probably ADHD as well. And, you know, I can't go around diagnosing people, and I would never do that as a psychotherapist. I don't assess, I don't diagnose, I just observe. It's quite difficult when you're itching to say something and you absolutely can't say anything. And the other thing as well, I found that process leading up to the assessment and diagnosis incredibly painful, because especially the autism side, because I hadn't even really thought about ADHD, but that made sense because I was running about all over the place and inattentive. I was everything. But it was, you know, it was feeling like I might be a fake, and the imposter syndrome and coming up, and, you know, because I'd always thought I was sort of mentally ill all the time, and then I realized I was just neurodivergent. And I think for me it was that, and certainly my clients coming to me when they're going towards assessment, they need a coach, they need a mentor. It's not just counseling and psychotherapy, it's having someone to hold your hand, give you resources, you know, chat about, you know, all sorts of things, you know, and it needs to change. I think the whole psychotherapeutic training and delivery's got to be different when it comes to neurodivergency. Personally, I think that. And just going back to your experiences at university, specifically the first one, how did it feel when the neuroscientist at Roehampton didn't support you or validate your concerns and anxiety?
That was the most shocking thing, because, and this is what I said to the learning supports lady when I emailed them. I said, what I find most shocking is that this happened in a department of neuroscience. So you think that there should be an awareness around an adult behaving in a certain way, you know, inattentive about a deadline, looking a bit stressed, asking for 3 or 4 extensions out of however many modules, you know, 7 modules, and, you know, more than half you ask for an extension. And almost invariably it was like the day before handing the essay as well, or, you know, so it was kind of like, you know, very last minute. And I think, is there not a pattern in there that somebody really should identify and say, right, so when they meet whenever, every 3 weeks or every month, and they have a chat about the handful of people there, we were not hundreds, we were probably like 20 in some of the lectures. So, you know, they discuss them. They say, right, what about this guy? You know, he's asked for 3 extensions. Anybody seen any strange behavior or anything that should, you know, to flag up, to ask him? Or and when I detailed everything in my email, and I actually loved the lectures. I thought she was a brilliant lecturer, and actually was very complimentary in my email as well. But when I told her about all the, you know, all the stuff, I went into one kind of like long story, you know, probably she got overwhelmed because my email was quite long. But she never actually apologized for, or she said, oh, she was sorry to hear it or anything like that. She, you know, it was all kind of,
defensive, I think it sounded like.
You need to be kind. You cannot just blame people, you know, along the lines of that. And I just thought, actually, I think you just got the complete wrong end of the stick. You know, I'm not blaming people. I'm just saying, I don't want this to happen to, well, 2 things. If my marks can be mended, then, you know, if they can be mended, then that's great. But to be quite honest, I've moved on. This is like in 2016. It's not like a big deal. For me, it was more important that other people in my situation didn't face the same kind of stress that I faced, and they are not thinking about it 5 years later because they have this kind of like dysphoria kind of effect.
I wonder how much has changed, and I wonder how long it's going to be before it changes significantly. I do happen to know that I have a friend who is a director at King's College, and King's College are very, very, very good, because I have a friend whose daughter has ME, probably fibromyalgia, and probably caused by stress as well. And the support that she gets at King's College is absolutely second to none. It's very, very good at King's College.
And it was really good at Middlesex as well. I think you're probably going to ask me something around Middlesex and my degree.
Yes, I mean, you went on to study at Middlesex, where the environment was very different, and we're told that adversity makes us stronger. What lessons have you learned from both of your academic experiences?
Well, I think there's a certain amount that you can change instead of just saying, right, I'm ADHD. My brain is always going to lack some of the dopamine that I need to focus or to, to get me motivated to do things. So I just take that kind of like lying down. Yes, it's always going to be like that. Yes, medication might help. Some days that it helps better than other days.
Yeah.
So it's not a super miracle. Some days it helps you feel more motivated. Some days it doesn't. But it's about how when you were talking about this fly on the wall documentary situation where we are observing ourselves all the time and the inner dialogue that we have with ourselves, and that can be a good thing in terms of like, it raises your self-awareness of things that happen in your life. And you think, if you struggle with deadlines and you find a system that is a little bit better and you stick to that, and you actually have a positive narrative to yourself about how when you do something in a certain way, it works and it makes you feel good, as opposed to get to the end of the day and feel depressed because you haven't achieved anything, and then the narrative is negative. Yes. If you change the narrative to yourself, I think that's extremely useful. And if you're surrounded by people who don't push you because they don't understand that your brain works differently, that's much better. And I think Middlesex has been great with that, because I shared my diagnosis with the professor who's been my supervisor. I told him about the fibromyalgia. I told him everything. I had like a long chat with him. He was absolutely fantastic, very accommodating. I should have handed in my thesis exactly a year ago. So I've had a year kind of like extension, so to speak, to finish it. Brilliant. Because I got into a complete tangle with it at one point, trying to finish it and rush it, and I wasn't happy. And that's when I had the chat with him. So, and I've actually included a neurodiverse perspective on my work as part of my thesis. And one of the things that I would like to be an outcome of that is that I would like to have a bigger role in academia going forward. If I can bring that with me, and I can actually bring my lived experience with me, and make sure that some of the things that I've lived don't happen to other people, and to accommodate what they might need, whether it's an extension or a chat, as you were saying, just having a chat with somebody who might be qualified like yourself, or just a simple
buddy or a mentor who's also got ADHD, just someone to offload. I mean, how do you want to change the way things are now in the area of neurodivergency? What do you think will be your own contribution to the community?
Yeah, I think my lived experience, I think everybody is unique in the sense that we have all things in common, but we have all our own experience. We come from different backgrounds, and it's a melting pot of people, because, depending on what type of ADHD you have, and depending on how severe your autism is, or your dyslexia or dyscalculia or whatever it is, it's a big melting pot of people. So in a way, that's challenging, but it's also fantastic, because we bring so much richness and different experiences from different backgrounds in all kind of walks of life. So as much as I can bring in from my own experience, that is great. And then from my own experience as a neuroscientist as well, who understands the brain, or I claim to understand the brain anyway, in a good day. So I think bringing that to the front as well, and say, look, these are the things that you can do for self-care, for example, for lifestyle health, as opposed to just lifestyle medicine. So something that you don't actually just use lifestyle as a medicine, you use it as a prevention tool. So things that you can do, like movement, like eating good food, like sleep, like going out and getting your hands dirty, gardening or something, because it might actually help your immune system and your cognitive function as well. And all those kind of like basic things that sometimes we just take for granted because we think, oh, the medication is going to sort it out, or the CBT is going to sort it out, and then we just don't pay attention to the fact that is a number of pillars that are going to keep the whole of the building standing.
That's right, and also, I mean, within the, I mean, you have the, on one side you have the autistic community, and then you have the autism community on that side, on the autism side, and it is quite different. You know, you have people who are actually, you know, they are ADHD, they have ADHD, or they're interested in ADHD. I find it quite frustrating and difficult sometimes to listen to people who are very activist type. You know, I think action is very important, because I don't want to be rattling lots of cages and demanding and wagging fingers and doing all that sort of stuff. What I quite like to do is I like to you know, do things by example. So, you know, I'd like somebody to come up to me and say, you know, oh, what you're doing, look, it looks quite interesting. Tell me more. I'd like to see what you're doing. I'd prefer to see that, so that between the whole community, whether you're neurodivergent or you're not neurodivergent, people are interested, and they don't just put the shutters down. They think, that's really interesting. You know, like when you play with a child and, you know, rather than trying to make them do something, you'll just go over and start drawing a really good cartoon and they'll come and watch. You know, just, you know, showing by example, I think is good. Now,
Yeah.
I see one of your areas of interest is, of course, the microbiology and gut health. And us ADHDers, we're rather paradoxical. I mean, I take a gut supplement and I eat gut-friendly foods. I drink lots of water and I make sleep a non-negotiable priority. Yet, I eat too much red meat and I love sugary foods and carbs. So what top piece of advice would you give to people to ensure a healthy gut and better mental health?
It's interesting that the signature of a gut in a person with ADHD is slightly different to somebody who is not ADHD, and there's some good indication of that, because there's been loads of studies done, particularly in children, where the microbiome is changing quite rapidly. So it's actually even more challenging to identify what might be a pattern for ADHD, for the ADHD microbiome versus a non-ADHD microbiome. And I'm actually involved in a clinical trial that should be published soon. Is actually being peer reviewed on the effects of kefir, the fermented milk.
Yeah, I have that every day.
That's good, on the symptoms of ADHD in children. So it's a pilot study. Should be out there for people to read soon, with a lovely lady, Kate Lawrence from St. Mary's University as the lead investigator, clinical psychologist from St. Mary's, and a group of other people from Goldsmiths and St. Mary's, and me. But the gist of it is that fermented foods are a really good source of a diverse colony of a community of bacteria that are, because it's a food matrix, and it's kind of as nature intended. It's softer, it's kinder on the gut of somebody who might be neurodivergent, who is going to have a quirky gut anyway, in general, and that might be a better route of getting your additional bacteria into your body than perhaps taking a super expensive gut supplement. So that would be something to take into account, whether it's a fermented dairy, so kefir or yogurt, or whatever actually agrees with you. If you're dairy free, there's really good sources of bifidobacteria in sauerkraut or kimchi, fermented cabbage and so on. So those would be, on a very general kind of scale, my preferred foods for the brain via the gut.
It's interesting you say that. I'm going to share something with you because I'm an oversharer. And when I was a kid, I used to eat willow, brick, chalk, bones, grass, paper, hair, and lots of other interesting things. I ate lots of non-food items. And when I was pregnant with my first child, I ate coal and ended up having £300 worth of orthodontist treatment. With my second child, I ate mud. And in 2007, I was diagnosed celiac, and I'm ADHD. So, you know, what you're saying about, you know, my flora in my gut, you know, my small intestine, the villi within, and, you know, all those sort of things. I mean, I've been gluten-free for all this time, and my blood tests are coming back as not celiac now. So I'm doing a good job, even though I'm eating sugar, which I really shouldn't do. But, you know, is that the sort of thing you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it's just it's a matter of actually making sure that your diet is varied and you're eating a range of different nutrients from particularly for the microbiome, fresh sources like, you know, plants particularly, so fruits and vegetables, not so much coal. I'm not sure what the the role of coal is in the microbiome. Mud, however, you know, if you have loads of bacteria in mud, the way you get them into your body is sometimes is interesting, because if you you know, if you rewind and put yourself 200,000 years ago, when we were kind of like, you know, running around and getting muddy and we didn't think anything of it, we got a lot of bacteria from the earth, from the soil, from picking up, you know, dirty fruit as we were hunter-gatherers. And those bacteria have actually played a role in colonizing our intestines. So we are less exposed to that, because if you live in a city and you live in, you know, in a place where you haven't got access to the outside easily, you live in a flat, for example, you might not get to touch the soil or to do gardening, or and then touch your mouth or touch your skin. Whenever there is a touch of, you know, whenever your hands are dirty, you're likely to at one point touch your face at one point or another. We humans, we do that all the time. So it's a source of those microbes that are actually in the soil that may not actually stay in your gut, but they play a role in how your immune system works, and they do for all animals, not just for humans. But that's quite an interesting kind of thing. You know, the soil thing that you mentioned, you may have got some bacteria out of that were actually good for your gut.
Well, you know, I am so much about the fact that we're humans. We're just a species of animal. We're very like chimpanzees and bonobos and gorillas. I know one of the things as far as mindfulness and something that's very good for us is to actually walk in the woods and take our shoes and socks off and walk on the soil. Is very important. I mean, we've always been a very muddy family, throwing the kids in the mud, eating mud, and all of that sort of thing. Nevertheless, I'm still celiac, but it's, you know, it's just the way it is. But I think your studies are absolutely fascinating, and I will definitely keep following you. And you know, I've absolutely, you know, loved our you know, our interview today and talking to you today. I've learned an awful lot, and I just think, you know, just the other thing as well is that ADHD people, we are hunter-gatherers. We are the ones that the minute we wake up in the morning, the ideas start popping like popcorn. We want to get out there and start finding things and problem solving and finding solutions and doing all these sort of different things. We were put on the planet to do that. So listen, society, and listen, neurotypical people out there, you need us, because we'll find things for you in detail, hyper focused, and you know, it's all good stuff. So thank you once again so much, Miguel, and I hope to have you perhaps on the podcast again in the future.
That'd be lovely. Thank you so much, Sally. I really enjoyed myself talking with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you very much for listening to the Neurodivergence and Mental Health podcast. Links and resources will be at the end in the show notes. I very much look forward to meeting you again. Thanks for listening. Bye.